Time for my favorite part of the show, Money, Power, Politics. And we are on our tax tracker beat. The New York Times and the Wall Street Journal reporting the Treasury Department is considering a change to capital gains tax that would result in a $100 billion tax break for guess who? The wealthy. Currently, when someone sells an asset, they have to pay capital gains taxes on the difference between the purchase price and the sales price. So if you invested $1 million in 1990 and sold that asset for $3 million in 2018, you would owe $476,000 on your capital gain. Indexing capital gains would adjust the purchase price for inflation, resulting in a huge tax cut. The same investment from 1990 would now owe $255,000 in taxes compared to $476,000 without adjusting for inflation. That sounds nerdy, but we're going to break it down. Joining me now, co-founder and editor of Risk Reversal, Dan Nathan, and Josh Brown, CEO of Ritholtz Wealth Management, both CNBC contributors. All right, Josh, to you first.
Yes.
Let's walk through this because, first of all, Steve Mnuchin is saying he is considering doing this. Obviously, it would go through Congress, but if not, they'd consider other measures. So they would use an executive order to do this when, at the end of the day, they've had these massive corporate tax cuts. Right. We don't yet know if they're trickling down. Wages are not going up. So the Treasury Department is in a position where they're coming out of a bigger hole because the amount of money they have from corporations is low. What would be the rationale for the American people to do this?
So historically, it's not common to see two things. Number one, a massive tax cut proposal coming less than a year after the prior massive tax cut proposal. And second, we are 9 years into an economic expansion. So this kind of stimulative fiscal policy is absolutely unheard of. You really can't find an example of it. And I understand why they're talking about doing it. It's been a dream of the party for 30 years. And frankly, it's not the most unfair thing in the world. We index a lot of things to inflation. So I'm not saying it's terrible. The timing just seems insane.
Listen, it's a common
given the
sense,
deficit.
It's a common sense idea. But think back to right after Trump won. There he is at 21 Club. I'm going to lower your taxes. Yeah. Larry Kudlow has wanted to do this forever. But the forgotten American, the average worker out there, how does this happen?
Well, if you're really going to call the tax cut of 2017 reform, this should have been part of it, right? And so if you're going to have some sort of bipartisan approach to this sort of tax policy, it should have been kind of a tit-for-tat sort of thing, a negotiated sort of thing. I think it's a real cheap political stunt. When you think about the grandstanding that we saw on Friday about this Q2 4.1 GDP print, I think they realize that Q3 has the potential to be a dud right in front of the midterm elections. When you think about this, this is really geared towards the donor class, right? So they're basically saying, well, we're going to do this hell or high water at some point because if we lose the House, we're going to do it, through executive order, that sort of thing. But to me, I think this is a hill that Democrats should die on. I think every hill, there's none too small that they should die on into the midterms when you think about it, because, at the end of the day, this just really does belie the president's populist message. It's really just kind of geared right towards the donors right into the midterms.
If you look at the president's economic policy, it sort of serves the same people who were served in the Obama administration, asset holders. And there was that gripe that unless you owned stocks during that 8 years and you were in the middle of this country, you were screwed. Yeah. So those same people remain screwed, and the administration is looking to help the donor class again. Why?
So I think it's important to point out that this did not originate under President Trump. This is a trend that's been in force for decades now, where you've just got this runaway inflation of asset prices in general. You've got all the policies toward the 80% of people that are the 20% of people who own 80% of the stock market, pro-real estate policies, and CEO pay, which is 100x the average worker, and it used to be 5 or 10x. So this is not new. However, it's being accelerated.
Except Trump campaigned on the opposite. Trump campaigned saying, I'm going to end all of this, yet he's accelerating it.
Right.
How is that not being caught by that Trump voter?
Well, don't they also know that they have a very strong likelihood of having a sort of lame duck president? I mean, so you also have Mnuchin is going to be out of there at some point, probably in 2019, and this is kind of his kind of kiss to the, 1% or his, I guess his ex-peers.
But to answer your question, the reason why the traditional Trump base, who is, I don't know about hurt by this particular policy that we're discussing, but definitely not helped. The reason why this gets a pass is because, and this is uniquely American, unlike Europeans, unlike people from other parts of the world, every American thinks that they are a millionaire in waiting. And I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but Americans in general think if only this regulation would get out of my way, or if only this would break in my direction, I will one day be like Mnuchin, and I will one day want to have all of the freedom and liberties to pay low tax. So people have this kind of ambition. I think it's innate. I think it's in our DNA. Think about the people that came to this country.
But hold on.
That's where that goes off.
I understand your point. This isn't hurting the person who lives on their wages, but we keep not mentioning the budget deficit.
Right.
And budgets matter specifically to fiscally conservative Republicans. The president rails about trade deficits.
Are there any of those
somewhere
left?
The president rails against trade deficits all day long, but our budget deficit is ballooning, and that does hurt the American people.
Well,
and when you're bringing in less tax revenue, that hurts.
Isn't it kind of ironic when Paul Ryan came into Congress, there was a budget surplus, and now he's going to leave in the fall or early next year, and there's going to be this massive deficit. And so, when you say that these conservative deficit hawks, they don't exist anymore. I mean, they just don't exist anymore. So, I think at the end of the day, we know how unpopular the 2017 tax cut. It's getting increasingly more unpopular as we head into the midterm. So I actually think this is really a bad move by the Republicans. I don't think it makes any sense.
One thing on the deficits, this is something that a lot of people miss. We have never, in the last half century, had a budget surplus other than two events. Right after the 1960s stock bubble and right after the 1999 stock bubble. So early 70s, we had a surplus. We blew it, of course. And then early 2000s, we had a surplus from the dot-com boom. So arguably, if we're going to get this situation where everyone rushes to sell assets that they've been sitting on forever and pay taxes like they did at the turn of the millennium, actually, there is a chance that it could offset the ballooning deficit. It might not be the worst thing. If you have people that have been sitting on a building for 30 years.
So you're buying this argument that growth, that these cuts, could spur so much growth.
We need a stock market. If you really want to, if you want a balanced, or if you want a budget surplus, unfortunately, you need a stock market bubble. This could help blow it even bigger.
Didn't we hear this argument? If you give these great corporate tax cuts, it's going to trickle down to the worker. And what did we see happen? Buybacks.
And they have 8 years to amortize the tax payments to the Treasury. So, I mean, to me, there's just so many loopholes. It makes little sense when you think about it. What are we talking about as far as tax receipts on a situation like this? You can't model it, and it's not going to be paid for with growth.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.